It's an Eastern Conference Finals rematch as the Pacers hand the Celtics their first loss of the season in overtime. The Cavs blow out the Lakers, and were the Grizzlies overrated coming into the season? It's all coming up on today's Locked On NBA Game Night.
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And joining me is my partner in crime, David Ramil, host of Locked On Heat. David, what did you see in the NBA last night?
11 games, lots of activity. Not sure how much we can really take from it. At this point in the season, there's so much to get into, and at the same time, it still feels like such a small sample size. So I'm not sure if I'm ready for overreactions just yet, but you know what? That's the type of show that we're going to run here. So let's see how we can get into it.
Hey, man, overreactions are part of what makes being a fan of basketball, a fan of the NBA, so much fun. Overreactions going both ways, right? Good and bad. Now, we want to thank you for making Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, or available on YouTube, where you can look at our glorious faces in full 1080p. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. And David, our game of the night, an Eastern Conference Finals rematch as the Pacers hand the Celtics their first loss of the season. Let's check in with Locked On Pacers host Tony East for the breakdown.
Celtics undefeated no more. They lose here in this building to the Pacers. Tony East here with Locked On Pacers, here to break it down as the Pacers get some sweet revenge after last year's Eastern Conference Finals disappointment, where they lost many games like this one to Boston. Close, late, overtime. The Celtics swept them last year. Pacers get this one done. It should not have come to this. Pacers are up 21 with 8 minutes and 40 seconds left and fall all over themselves for the final stretch to get this one to overtime. Thankfully for the Pacers, they had a godlike night from Pascal Siakam, 29 points, 11 rebounds, 5 assists, including the game-winning three with just a few seconds to go. 6 threes for Siakam, ties his career high, and Ben Mathurin, the other hero for the Pacers, with 30 points and 11 rebounds of his own. He was huge off the bench, especially after Andrew Nembhard got hurt early. Without Halliburton being superhuman, they still had huge performances from other guys to get it done. We'll have much more on this epic win for the Pacers on Locked On Pacers.
All right, David, first off, I'm going to send Tony a message about whatever that dial tone was in the background of his audio as we got his breakdown straight from the arena. But man, this was a crazy game between two strong Eastern Conference teams. A 38-point fourth quarter by the Boston Celtics, a 14-2 run to end regulation. Tyrese Halliburton hits a turnaround fadeaway to give the Pacers like a 3-point cushion. Celtics don't call timeout. Tatum just walks it up. The Pacers don't foul up 3 for whatever reason. I feel like that was like an NBA standard at this point, fouling up 3. And Tatum walks up, nails the 3-pointer to tie the game up. They go to overtime, and then the Pacers were able to hold on. Pascal Siakam hit some big buckets down the stretch of this game. This has got to be a great, like a feel-good win for the Pacers, especially considering the fact that Tyrese Halliburton has not been playing his best basketball to start this season.
It's a good win, but at the same time, it kind of reveals your biggest weaknesses of the Pacers. And Tony said it best. You know, it feels very similar to a lot of the games we saw in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. And they blew a huge lead. Like, it should never have gone to this point. And they allowed the Celtics to come back despite 6 of 29 shooting from 3-point range for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown combined. So that was as ugly a win as you could get. So if you're going to take away some feel-good lesson from it, that's fine. But at the same time, I think it kind of shows more over than the Celtics' strengths. Despite the fact that they wind up losing the game, the Pacers wind up barely. They pulled victory from the jaws of defeat, if you will, because they really did not play their best style of game. And I guess, again, there's injuries. Halliburton isn't playing particularly well, as Tony pointed out, and yet they still managed to claw out a win. It's great, but you can't really hang your hat on. You've got room for improvement there, and the kind of thing that you're still second tier to a team as good as the Celtics.
One potential other silver lining, though, for the Pacers in this game, despite that collapse or almost near collapse in the fourth quarter of the Celtics, is Tyrese Haliburton, right? He has been struggling. He only had 1 point just before halftime. He hit this ridiculous contested fadeaway jumper just before halftime for his first bucket of the game, but he finished the night with 17 points. He had his 12 assists in there, but he looked a lot more like himself in that second half, and hopefully that's maybe a thing for the Pacers where he can kind of springboard himself into the Tyrese Haliburton that we're used to seeing instead of the Tyrese Haliburton that has just, again, not looked like himself through a handful of games so far.
Yeah, shot just 2 of 10 from 3-point range, so clearly still struggling to find his shot. I'm not sure what's going on with Haliburton, but you know what? If it's an encouraging sign, if he's on his path towards getting back to the version that we saw last year, he was one of the most exciting players to watch all season long last year. And unfortunately, injury wound up taking away some of his efficiency in the playoffs. So the national audience didn't really get a chance to see him play as well as possible. But hopefully he can get started again because he is one of the bright young stars of the league, and he should be able to continue to claw his way out. But man, it's just been an ugly start to it. And I can't figure out what exactly it has been. You know, the shots are there. He's got wide open looks. He just hasn't been able to knock them down. And I don't think he's dealing with any kind of sort of injury or anything. Do you have any idea as to why he might be struggling the way he has been to start the season?
I mean, at this point, I might, when it's the kind of guy who's as quality of a player as Tyrese Haliburton, I kind of chalk it up to, it might just be a shooting slump, like the most ill-timed shooting slump ever to start the season. Because to your point, right, even in this game, some of the looks that he was getting were like wide open looks that he normally would sink without any issue, and seemingly he just hasn't been able to connect, right? So at this point, when you're a player like Tyrese Haliburton who has the cachet that he does, right, the resume that he does, maybe you shouldn't overreact to a small, 4 or 5 game, 6 game sample size, whatever it is. Just give him time. Maybe he just hits a shooting slump, a little rough patch right here at the start of the season. He'll dig himself out of it. Now, sticking with the Eastern Conference, we'll take a trip down to South Beach as the New York Knicks visited your Miami Heat, David. Knicks getting the win 116-107. Karl Anthony-Towns, easily his best game as a member of the Knicks. 44 points on 17 of 25 shooting in this game. Went 4 of 5 from long distance to go along with 13 rebounds. On the other side, Tyler Herro had 34 points, 7 assists. This was a 4-point game, David. 102-98. The Knicks leading by just 4 with 3.5 minutes left to play. What happened down the stretch there?
This is the result of two teams, and I made this point on Locked On Heat. Two teams, one that made improvements over the offseason, the other one that didn't. And you've got the kind of stability, and unfortunately, they just stagnated in Miami. They just haven't been able to really develop that roster or get anything more out of the players that they've added over the years. And then you look at the New York side, Karl Anthony-Towns. He was incredible, unstoppable. Bam Adebayo, Defensive Player of the Year candidate perennially, just wasn't able to contain him at all. Cat was able to get whatever looks he wanted, whether it was from 3-point range or in the low post. He just couldn't be stopped, whether it was Bam, Jimmy, or anybody else in between. Nobody could really stop him. Mikal Bridges, another addition in the offseason, had a big game for them with 17 points. It was just the difference right there is where you see these players continually adding to a New York's team that had such a fun run last year. Miami, it just looks stagnant. They're trying to incorporate a new offense where they kind of devalue the mid-range shot, which was a basic staple of their offense last year, unfortunately. And you see the result. Bam Adebayo, only 11 points, really struggling this season to find his groove in the new offense. Jimmy Butler looked passive, couldn't find any sort of aggression looking for his shot. And as a result, Tyler Herro wound up dominating the offense for Miami, but it just doesn't look good. It hasn't looked good to start the season with only 2 wins against poor quality opponents in Charlotte and the Detroit Pistons.
Coming up, the Cavs are undefeated after blowing out the Lakers. And are the Bulls actually going to be good this season? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. It's that simple. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one spot. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you actually place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You can head on over there, take a look at all the different odds they've got available. Check out their parlay builder, different season leaders, season awards, or just the outright favorites to win this year's Super Bowl. Right now, the Chiefs plus 450, the Ravens plus 650, the Lions right there also at plus 650, and just behind them, you got the 49ers at plus 750, and the Bills rounding out the top 5 at plus 850. 50. So for all those odds and so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And continuing on here at Locked On NBA Game Night, where we thank you for making us your first listen each and every day, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can head on over there, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Now, David, our very next game of the night, the Cavaliers laid a whooping on the Los Angeles Lakers, 134-110. Let's check in with our Locked On Cavs host, Danny Cunningham, for the breakdown.
Cunningham at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. Cavs moved to 5-0 with a big win over the Los Angeles Lakers. Cavs now have topped 130 points in 3 of their first 5 games. The offense looks awesome. Donovan Mitchell got off to a great start tonight. Jarrett Allen also had a great game. He finished with 20 points. I believe 17 rebounds, was fantastic on both ends of the floor. Evan Mobley actually led the Cavs in scoring. He had a killer fourth quarter, was just really good after dealing with foul trouble. He finished the night with 5 fouls. He and Darius Garland actually didn't play a ton. I'm not sure either of them reached 20 minutes because they were both dealing with foul trouble, but the Cavs get a big win over what I think is a pretty good Los Angeles Lakers team. Their week of challenges continues as the Orlando Magic are coming to town Friday night, and then they go to Milwaukee on Saturday. One other thing really cool about tonight, Bronny James, first basket in the NBA, happening in the building where his dad's maybe best athletic achievement hangs in the rafters. I think that's a really cool thing too. So Cavs fans got to see a great win tonight and also a really cool moment too. I'll be back later this weekend.
Yeah, David, this game, I mean, from the jump, the Cavaliers were all over this game. They had a really strong start. Donovan Mitchell was electric there in that first quarter. This Cavs team with Kenny Atkinson at the helm, number 1 offense in the NBA right now. I fully expected them to look different with Kenny Atkinson. I fully expected him to come in and kind of change some things around and that they would look better and not quite, I don't know. It just, under JB, it never really felt like they unlocked their true offensive potential, right? They just were not a great offensive team. They hung their hat solely on their defense. Right now, number 1 offense in the NBA, number 4 in defense, and maybe kind of did we maybe forget about the Cavs a little bit, right? There was that arms race over the offseason, right? The Knicks trading for Cat and making their big moves. The Pacers get Paul George. Like, did we maybe forget that the Cavaliers were one of those teams right there at the top of the Eastern Conference last year?
I'm not sure that we forgot them entirely, but they kind of fit into that whole second tier there. You had the Celtics at the top. You had the Knicks as strong contenders after their offseason moves, and the Sixers with the addition of Paul George to Joel Embiid, which neither have played this season so far. It felt like, they were going to be at the top of the Eastern Conference. You had Milwaukee kind of in there as well. And then you had Cleveland, Orlando, Miami, Indiana. These were the teams that kind of filled out that second tier in the Eastern Conference. Maybe they're not second tier anymore. Maybe they're a first tier team. And that's with Max Strus, who's been out all season too. So they've got Dean Wade as a starter, and they haven't missed Strus at all at his 3-point shooting and everything that he brings to the table. So this has been a fantastic team. Underrated as heck has been Jarrett Allen. He's been phenomenal. I know Danny pointed it out in his comments, but he was really, really good. And just the way they set the pace early on, the Lakers had no response whatsoever. They looked slow. They looked old. They couldn't really get into their offense. No groove whatsoever. And Cleveland was able to do whatever they wanted early on and pretty consistently throughout the game.
I know Danny mentioned it as well, but Evan Mobley in this game leading the way for scoring for the Cavaliers, 25 points, 12 of 16 shooting. Look, for me, the question mark for Evan Mobley has been to this point in his career, right? What is he going to look like offensively? We know he's an incredibly impactful defensive piece for the Cavaliers, but can he ever get to a point where he can be a reliable go-to option for them offensively? The offense has kind of come and go to this point, but this was a really encouraging sign for Evan Mobley and a really strong game for him.
Absolutely. He looks like a first-time All-Star waiting to happen. Outplayed Anthony Davis, who had been playing like an MVP. Mobley had a fantastic game on both ends of the ball, and he just was really, really good. And he's looked really good to start the season as well. He seems to have found his groove under Atkinson in a way, as you pointed out, that Bickerstaff never really could find out. So kudos to Atkinson and Mobley for both taking a leap this year.
sticking with the Eastern Conference here for a minute. A lot of Eastern Conference games in the NBA slate. We had this 11-game slate, and a lot of them were Eastern Conference games here, David. Let's go to Chicago, where the Magic lost to the Bulls 102-99. The Magic giving up a 20-point lead in this game. Let's hear from Philip Rossman-Reich of Locked On Magic about this one.
This is Philip Rossman-Reich, the host of Locked On Magic, and I'm just going to skip the fourth quarter of this recap because the Magic's offense skipped the fourth quarter of this game. The Chicago Bulls outscored Orlando 16-12 in the fourth quarter to take home a 102-99 win, and a really disappointing and frustrating loss for the Magic. At the end of the day, this just comes down to your ability to make shots. And while Orlando has made a lot of progress and a lot of gains in a lot of areas offensively, including Paolo Banchero and his overall efficiency, this team is still about one thing, and that is getting into the paint, that is scoring near the basket, and that is getting to the foul line. Orlando has become a much better three-point shooting team. There's no denying that, and that's going to help them as they continue to progress throughout the season. But in this game, after going crazy in the first half, relied too much on that three-point shot, and that's ultimately what cost them this game. The Magic couldn't find those easy buckets, and the Chicago Bulls were able to sneak just enough to win the game.
Yeah, look, this was a game that looked like the Magic should have and probably would have won this game. And this was to me the question mark about the Magic, right? Their big offseason addition was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and he was a great addition to this Magic team, but it was almost just doubling down on what they've been at, so far last season, right? They were a strong defensive team. There's still big question marks about what the offensive identity of this squad is. It's basically do or die, living every moment, every possession through Paolo Banchero, and sometimes the offense just dries up. Even if Paolo's doing a good job driving, kicking, attracting a double team and kicking it out to shooters, there really isn't another guy to be able to step up and take some of that pressure off. And that's where you look at a guy like Franz Wagner, and he needs to be able to kind of take some of that pressure off of Paolo Banchero.
Yeah, Banchero had a big game with 31 points. He looked phenomenal as he has all season. At the same time, this kind of felt like last year's Magic offense where they were struggling with a three-point shot. Only 24% overall on three-point attempts. They looked terrible. Nobody was able to hit a shot in that starting lineup. 0 for 3 from Wagner, 0 for 4 from Wendell Carter Jr. Not a good look for them. They just didn't get the production they needed from behind the arc, and they're just struggling right now. I mean, with their defense as good as it is, they've got a shot almost every night, but if their offense is going to continue to be inconsistent, they might still be one of those second-tier teams in the Eastern Conference.
Now, here's my question to you, David. Are the Bulls going to be good this year? I kind of all signs pointed towards like they were finally going to like rip the Band-Aid off. They were done being a middling team. They were like, you know what? We're going to trade for young guys. We're going to lean into it. We're going to rebuild. And they haven't done that yet. They haven't like let all the young guys out to flood the floor and get all these garbage, I can't even call them garbage time minutes, tanking minutes, if you will. They haven't gone full rebuild yet. And they actually look kind of good this season.
This looks like one of those teams at the end of the season where they're kind of playing their players. They're the players at the end of the bench, or maybe they're young development projects. They've got nothing else to play for. That's kind of what it feels like with this Bulls team. Like nobody really believes in them. Maybe they do internally, although I haven't really heard much of that from the Bulls locker room either. So I'm not sure what to make of it. It's only a 5-game sample size, but they look good. Josh Giddey looked great today. He had 4 from three-point range. That was the knock on him, is that he can't hit the outside shot. Well, he certainly did tonight against the Magic, and a very good defense. I don't know what to make of this Bulls team. They're fun to watch. They're exciting. They're interesting. Something you haven't been able to say about Chicago in a long time. Zach LaVine struggled tonight. They still managed to find a way to beat a good Orlando team. I'm just not ready to say that they're a good team just yet. Let me get a little bit more of a double-digit sample size before we can start saying that.
Man, I'll tell you what, I want to see more Matas Buzelis, though. That's all I'm like. I was expecting him to be like, I called him as my like dark horse contender for rookie of the year, and we haven't seen nearly enough of him so far in a Bulls jersey. I thought he was going to get like the ultimate runway green light, especially after Summer League, like hearing fans chanting Matas, Matas in the stands. I was really excited to see him in a Bulls jersey this season. Hasn't been anything spectacular so far, but that's also just kind of a side effect of this most recent draft class. It's been kind of a letdown to this point. More on that in a little bit as we get to Wizards Hawks a little bit further down the line. But let's swing back over to the Western Conference here for just a moment, as the Oklahoma City Thunder took care of business against the San Antonio Spurs. 105-93 win. Nothing fancy on the Thunder. Just doing what they're supposed to do. They win a game against an opponent that they're supposed to beat. But the guy that I want to talk about from this game, David, Victor Wembanyama. 27 minutes, only 6 points, 1 of 5 shooting. He did leave the game at one point. He had kind of a hard spill, went back to the Spurs locker room for a minute. He did come back into the game, so maybe he was playing through a little bit of something in this game, but 4 games into the Spurs season now, he's had realistically 1 game where he looked dominant, and the other 3 have been subpar or mediocre. I thought the whole point of bringing in Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes and adding the veterans to this roster, we're supposed to be, hey, we're putting the training wheels there so that Wemby can take that next step and be the dominant force that he's supposed to be, and he's looked anything but that so far in these handful of games to start the year.
You might not have known this, but I've been kind of slow to jump on the hype train about Victor Wembanyama. Like, he's great, no doubt about it. He looks like he's going to be a future All-Star at some point, but it just feels like NBA media in general has really just gone way overboard in one direction of trying to say that he's like the greatest player of all time. And especially after everybody was looking at how much weight he put on in the offseason, games like these really show that there's still a lot for him to work on and to develop, and he's still not ready to make that kind of leap that we expect, or a lot of people expected him to make. But you also have to give credit to Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm not going to let you kind of shift all of the attention onto the Spurs and Victor Wembanyama. As much as he struggled, a lot of the reason for him struggling was Chet Holmgren doing a fantastic job defending him, the Thunder in general playing the kind of high-level defense that we expected him to, which is why I think they're going to continue to be the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. So to me, I think this is more about the Thunder kind of putting their imprint on the game and taking Wembanyama out rather than Wembanyama just continuing to struggle.
Well, we're going to see what the season holds for Wemby as he progresses. I need to start seeing some dominant performances from him, but I am in full agreement with your point about the Thunder. They are 100% going to be locked up at the top of the Western Conference again this year. I think they're going to be the only team that cracks 50 wins in the Western Conference. That's one of my predictions coming into this season. But coming up, we're the Grizzlies. Heavily overrated coming into the year, and are the Atlanta Hawks in trouble? We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On NBA Game Night, where we've got 6 more games on our 11-game slate to get to, and the first one that we are going to tag is the Memphis Grizzlies losing to the Brooklyn Nets 119-106. Relative to expectations, David, this is a pretty bad loss. Let's hear what Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies had to say about this one.
Zaire Williams revenge game? That's not fun to say out loud, but that's exactly what happened in Memphis, Tennessee on Wednesday night. Zaire and his Brooklyn Nets came to Memphis after an overtime game the night before, and on the second night of a back-to-back, ran the Grizzlies off the court in a very disappointing loss. How does Memphis respond? That's a great question. I'm Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies, and a lot of the things that have been rearing their ugly head to start this season for the Grizzlies did so again in this contest. The Grizzlies had health issues. Both Marcus Smart and Desmond Bane go down in this contest. But I would not be being honest with you, dear listener, dear viewer, if I did not point out questionable rotation decisions from the head coach, Taylor Jenkins, John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. sitting out together for way too long of stretches, especially in a fourth quarter when the game was still within their grasp. It feels like missed opportunities, both in terms of perimeter defense and rotations.
All right, David. My thing with the Grizzlies coming into this year, I felt like every pundit, so many talking heads were like, oh, the Grizzlies are going to be back. They've got Ja, they've got their big 3, Desmond Bane, Triple J, all this. And I came in thinking there's a lot of questions with this Grizzlies team. I was not ready to anoint them and be like, oh yeah, they're top 4, top 6 in the Western Conference. I feel like they've still got a lot to figure out. And people really kind of forget that back the last time the Grizzlies were actually good, when they were back-to-back 2 seeds in the Western Conference, back-to-back seasons, Dillon Brooks and Steven Adams were 2 big parts of the success of that Grizzlies team. Those 2 guys are now in Houston Rockets red, and there was 2 really big role player shoes to kind of fill if you're the Grizzlies.
No doubt about it. Like, you're missing key components there, but they have enough. I don't think they're quite overrated, to ask your original question. It's only been 5 games. They're still trying to figure it out. And I think a lot of tonight boils down to two things. One, Ja Morant being 5 of 16 from the floor, only finishing with 14 points, going 1 of 6 from three-point range. He was clearly struggling to get his shot. They did a good job of defending him. And this was FIBA Dennis Schroeder going out there with 33 points. I don't know if he pictured Zach Edey in a Canadian jersey or what, because he was attacking him all night. He looked phenomenal. It looked like just the vintage Schroeder that we've seen on the international stage. He was great for Brooklyn. As far as the Grizzlies are concerned, they'll figure it out. They're too good a team. Jenkins is too good a coach. I know he struggled perhaps in Joe's view in terms of his overall rotations, but I think he's going to do a better job overall. And, Desmond Bane was limited. He was a big part of their success recently as well. So I'm not too concerned about the Grizzlies, but ask me next week after a couple more losses and I might change the tune.
See, that's where I'm at. I look at, trying to mix in Zach Edey at the starting 5 spot, and there's still some question marks, I think, with that roster. I'm not going to write them off or anything. I just wasn't ready for like the pundits who were like, oh yeah, they'll be the number 2 team in the Western Conference. That's kind of where I was coming from with like, are they overrated or were they overrated coming into this season? Now we'll keep things sticking out here in the Western Conference. We had a weird scheduling quirk. The NBA has been doing this quite a bit lately where they've had teams play back-to-back, like in the exact same arena. So we had Pelicans Warriors Part 2, I guess, literally a back-to-back, both times playing at the Warriors arena, and same result though. So still no Steph Curry for the Warriors, and the Pelicans still unable to get it done against them. Now, again, both teams actually in this game are completely banged up. Warriors walk away with the win 104-89, but on both sides of this, I mean, the Pelicans are missing CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, DeJounte Murray. The Warriors are missing Steph. They're missing Andrew Wiggins, DeAnthony Melton. Let's throw it out to Jake Madison for the recap on this one.
The night after getting embarrassed by the Warriors without Steph Curry, the Pelicans got embarrassed by the Warriors without Steph Curry again, but this time it was even worse. Zion Williamson, the most talented player on the court, added nothing. 12 points on 5 of 20 shooting. That's one night after he scored pretty effectively over Draymond Green. What changed? And while Green did up his defense, Zion needs to adjust as well, and he failed to do so. These are the type of games he needs to dominate, and he failed that test. Injuries hurt. No DeJounte Murray, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, CJ McCollum in this one. But losing the way they did to a team that's also injured, that's absolutely unacceptable. The Pelicans now have a 4-game homestand coming up, and it should be make or break for head coach Willie Green. This team needs a big shakeup, and anything less than 3-1 should be the catalyst for that change.
Okay, David, my question to you. Jake said it himself. Do the Pelicans still have enough that they should have won this game despite the 4 key rotation guys that they do have on injury reserve right now?
It makes it so much easier to take Williamson out of his process and what he does so well. When everybody else is hurt, you can just kind of focus in on him. And again, a lot of that was on Draymond, one of the best defenders of this generation. I'm a little surprised more than anything else to hear Jake say that they're calling for Willie Green's spot already as a coach. That seems like a little rash. Again, this early in the season, I know expectations were high in New Orleans, but given the injury history and everything else that they've gone through over the last couple of games, it feels a little unfair to put him on the hot seat so quickly. Having said all that, Jake knows his team better than anybody, so I understand the pressure that the team must be under, but I think Williamson was just taken out as a result of everybody else being missing from that starting lineup.
You know who's playing out of his mind right now in the absence of Steph Curry? Brandon Pajimski. He was flirting with a triple-double in this game, 13 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists. The Warriors almost added one more guy to the injury list because he had a nasty spill at the end of this game. He got kind of like undercut, landed on his like hip side area, and he was down for an extended stretch in the final like couple 2.5 minutes of this game, and it very much felt like the Warriors had this thing wrapped up, and that's one thing you never want to see happen, period. You don't want to see injuries happen at all, but especially at the end of a game that's already over, it's pretty much already decided. You hate to see that happen. So we got Warriors, Pelicans out of the way. Sticking with the Western Conference, we had the Blazers and Clippers, a game that looked like it was going to last forever with all the fouls taking place at the end of this one. And the Clippers let one slip. This is kind of, I think, what we're going to see more and more of as the season progresses here with this version of the LA Clippers. Obviously still missing Kawhi Leonard, a big part of what they're trying to do. They're kind of all built around this heliocentric James Harden-led offense, and it's not the same James Harden from back when he was in Houston, but losing 106-105 to a very bad Portland Trailblazers team, the Clippers have such a small margin for error, David, and this game kind of showed you that, where if they're not firing on all cylinders, they don't have everything going right, then I think on any given night, even a bad team can sneak up and beat them.
Yeah, only 2 starters in double digits for the Clippers. Not a great look. Their offense is just woeful at this point. Without Kawhi, you can totally understand why that's the case. But they got 30 points from Norman Powell. I don't know. That just is a team that really seems to be floundering and clearly without an identity. Missing Paul George, of course, and now without Kawhi Leonard as well. Who knows what to make of this team? They're probably not going to even be a playoff team, to be honest with you.
At this point, I definitely had faded the Clippers considerably. I was like, you know what, they're going to be the one Western team that like gets bumped from, the top 10 bracket. They'll be down there at the bottom, a couple wins early. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is something here. Maybe James Harden has one more season in him where he can drag a team to, 45, 50 wins in the Western Conference. We've seen him do it before, but ultimately, I don't know if that's going to be what this version of the Clippers looks like. They need Kawhi Leonard back if they want to have any chance at salvaging this season and making any kind of noise in the Western Conference. Let's go ahead and swing things back out east for a moment here as the Detroit Pistons got their first win of the season, 105-95 against the still banged up Philadelphia 76ers. Let's throw it out to Kuka Hill for the breakdown on this one.
The Pistons got their first win of the season against the Philadelphia 76ers. Host of the Locked On Pistons podcast, Kuka Hill here. Yes, the Philadelphia 76ers were without Joel Embiid. Yes, they were without Paul George. But when you're the Detroit Pistons, none of that really matters. You just need to be able to get a win. You need to be able to win the games that you're supposed to win. And this was one of the games that they were supposed to win. They took real control of this game in the third quarter. But just like every other game so far this year, in the fourth quarter, the opposing team tried to make a run. The Philadelphia 76ers cut it down to 10 after a 9-0 run to start the fourth quarter. And this time, the Pistons veterans came through to help a young team that has not been able to close game and have this mental block in their head about closing games. This time, Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr. scored 16 of the Pistons' 24th quarter points, helped them close out this game. Hopefully, this is a good sign of things to come for the Detroit Pistons.
Look, it's got to feel good for the Pistons to be able to get a win. I feel like the expectations, though, at this point for Cade Cunningham, I don't know if they're unrealistic expectations, but I got to see this Pistons take like at least a marginal step forward this season, right? Like I'm talking, they should be able to be flirting maybe with like the 30 wins area, if at all, because at what point do you start looking at Cade and you're like, okay, you're going to be the franchise guy, you're going to be the face of the Pistons. When can you start like willing your team to some wins? And this was a good start, a good step in the right direction, but when are we going to see it more frequently from Cade?
I think we will, to be honest with you. I think he's put up some big numbers so far to start the season. They're still trying to figure everything out. They've got their new coach in Bickerstaff. He's got them much better prepared than they were last year. They look like a completely different team. They've been feisty. They were feisty last year at times until finally the reality hit them and punched them right in the face. But I think they're still a better team than they were last year, and they'll continue to make marginal improvements over the course of the season. I'm bullish on this group. I think they're going to be a good team. 30 wins, that seems possible.
30 win. If I give you 30.5, are you taking the over or the under on that?
Take the over.
Oh, okay. You know what? We got Pistons fan David Ramil in the house right here. I love it. I respect it. All right. Let's go we got 2 more games to get to here. Hawks Wizards in what is this is, again, we mentioned it earlier, right? This might be one of the least hyped like draft classes ever in recent history. And so we saw yet again in this game, Alex Sarr on the Wizards side of things, Zachary Risachet on the Hawks side of things. Now, this was a much better showing for these two in their, I guess, rematch, because these two teams played already recently. This time, the Hawks visiting the Wizards, losing 120-133. Previously, it was the Wizards visiting the Hawks in their first meetup. But let's throw it to our Locked On Hawks host, Brad Rowland, who has some serious concerns after this one.
Friends, my name is Brad Rowland. I'm the host of the Locked On Hawks podcast, and the Hawks have now lost 3 straight games, including back-to-back losses against the Washington Wizards, 1 in Atlanta and 1 in D.C. This time around on Wednesday, a 133-120 loss by Atlanta. And as you could probably guess by that score, defensively, it was a mess for the Hawks in this game, particularly the second half. They allowed 76 points after halftime to Washington. And yes, the Hawks are certainly banged up to a large degree right now, missing 4 of their top 5 perimeter defenders at this point, and that helps to explain what transpired in this game to some degree. At the same time, they did not play very well in this game, as you might imagine. They had one strong stretch in the middle of the game, and then other than that, a rough start, a rough finish, and a pretty ugly loss all the way around, even with the injuries as a part of the explanation. So we'll dive into all of what transpired in this game and much more on the Locked On Hawks podcast.
David, at this point, which team isn't banged up? I feel like every NBA team is dealing with some amount of injuries. This might be the most early season injuries that I've seen in recent memory.
I feel like we've been saying that about every season for the past 5 seasons, where our teams just start having injuries early on, and it kind of just feels like it defines the rest of the year. It'll even out, but I think maybe we're just prone to a little bit of an overreaction at this point. But to Brad's point, the Hawks look terrible. They look like one of those teams that'll drop, allowing those Pistons teams to kind of eclipse that 30-game win mark there, because the Hawks, from everything I've heard, it looks like the Hawks are on the brink of making some kind of changes there. There's frustration brewing. They're just not a good team, and I don't expect them to kind of turn it around at any point this season. So I wonder what's going to happen next with this group, because it doesn't look like it's going to be very pretty.
How long before we see Trae Young like officially ask out, trade demand, trade request, all that stuff?
By Christmas.
By Christmas. Ooh, that would be fun for a Christmas Day episode. Talk about some Trae Young trade rumors. Look, last game that we got here for you on our 11-game slate, a really fun game between the Toronto Raptors and the Charlotte Hornets. This was a game, David, where defense was absolutely optional. A final score, Hornets winning 138 to 133. Look, I was a little bullish on the Hornets coming into the year. I thought, okay, Charles Lee, right, is going to bring like a defensive grit, a little bit of an edge to this Hornets squad. Hasn't really appeared to be the case so far. They haven't really picked up the slack defensively. Now, they look like a much more poised team at times. They look competitive. They've been in every single game that they've played so far. At this point, too, I mean, LaMelo Ball is looking like his, I guess, former All-NBA self or All-Star version of himself, where I think this could be a really big year for him. And I kind of pegged the Hornets as like my sneaky team to make a little bit of noise in the Eastern Conference.
No, I don't buy that. I think Melo's going to put up some big numbers because that's what he's done throughout his career, but I just don't see that translating to any actual wins here. The point you made about Cade Cunningham, I would make that about LaMelo Ball. He's going to put up some numbers, he's going to put up some big games. Everybody's going to be impressed by his 35-foot three-point shots, and yet they're not going to win more than 25 games.
Oh, not more than 25 games. All right, so we're bullish on the Pistons and we're down on the Hornets in this podcast. I respect it. I got one more question though for you, David. And I feel like you're going to be against this now because you're already down on my Hornets. I'm going to call them my Hornets on this show. Trey Mann, potential dark horse candidate for Sixth Man of the Year because he has been playing out of his mind so far. Now, if the Hornets don't win enough, then I feel like he's not going to have a shot at it. But right now, he's currently got 10th best odds at plus 2,100 via FanDuel Sportsbook. 9 guys in front of him. How do you feel about him in the Sixth Man of the Year competition?
He's been great. Sixth Man of the Year feels a little iffy, maybe most improved because he certainly put up some big numbers so far, and I'd expect that to be the case moving forward. But Sixth Man, again, like you said, you probably have to contribute more towards winning basketball, and that just won't happen in Charlotte.
Well, that's going to do it for our 11-game slate in the NBA. We appreciate you for hanging out with us, sticking with us through this 11-game slate here at Locked On NBA Game Night. You can track down David over at Locked On Heat. You can find me over at Locked On Rockets. And just so you know, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. We're introducing our Locked On daily newsletters for every single team. It's your one-stop ultimate team and league coverage newsletter delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com to start your day with the all-new free Locked On newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for checking out our show. If you haven't done so yet, consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. The best way you can help us out, listen every single day, like and subscribe on YouTube, and drop us a comment while you're there. But that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On NBA Game Night.